Linsey Knerl is a mom of six in Nebraska who has been a working and homeschooling mom for over 15 years. In 2021, her book, Homeschool Hacks: How to Give Your Kid a Great Education Without Losing Your Job or Your Mind, was published by Simon Schuster and served as a timely resource for the many parents who were drawn to homeschooling as a result of the education disruption caused by the COVID response. I am so glad to have Linsey with us today. Linsey Knerl, welcome to the Liberated
Thank you.
Podcast.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, and not in real life, but virtually. So
Yes. Well, and we have had the pleasure of meeting in real life too, at the Freedom Fest conference last year in Las Vegas, and hopefully again soon. So great to have you on the podcast. I've been wanting to talk with you for a while, especially about your experience as both a working and a homeschooling mom. Kind of how do you juggle those responsibilities, and then especially about this Homeschool Hacks book, which is just really delightful. Such an approachable conversational resource. I just think it's really a nice way for parents who are considering homeschooling to kind of look at their options, look at what it would take. Just so kind of non-threatening, the approach, and I think really encouraging and inspiring for a lot of families. So thank you for writing it, and thank you again for being here. So let's start before we kind of dive into why you decided to write the book and some of the tips that you include in the book. Let's start with your own homeschooling journey. Your kids have always been homeschooled, and I wonder why you made that educational choice from the beginning.
sure. So like many parents who have that struggle between going to work and leaving their child in daycare and then missing them and then having them come home and realize you missed some big milestone that they got to show for someone else. I had a little bit of that tug at my heartstring that had me thinking, okay, should I be working nights? Should I be working weekends? My husband and I were already kind of in that place where we both needed income, but we also wanted that time with our children. So we were working split or alternating shifts already. And then when we moved to a more rural area where we weren't sure what the daycare options were, school was kind of being pressed as early as 3 or 4 for like a pre-kindergarten, preschool, I guess lifestyle. And we kind of felt like, oh, I don't know that I want this just yet. Like I felt like there was more to be done at home. So we kind of put it off with my oldest daughter, who's now 25. We did, activities at home. We got workbooks from the dollar store. We didn't know anything about homeschooling. We just felt like it wasn't quite right to put her into school yet. And we just kind of kept extending that experiment, as we called it, year after year after year, more resources, got connected with other parents in the area, joined activity groups, started bringing our younger ones into it. And we just kept saying, as long as this is working, we'll keep doing it. But if at any point it doesn't work, we'll re-examine. And here we are. I've got one graduated and out of the house and working, and my second one's getting ready to go to college, and 2 others in high school, and a 9-year-old. And everyone just seems to be thriving, and I'm thriving. I feel like I'm the parent and the grown-up I've always wanted to be, but I needed that interaction with my children to get me there. So selfishly, it's also been a beautiful thing for myself and my husband.
So great. And what amazing perspective you have, kind of having homeschooled all that time. Now you have older students who are, past homeschooling and living successful adult lives. What have you found kind of over the course of homeschooling, especially with 6 kids, I imagine, who are all very individual, that, kind of have their own strengths and passions and gifts and talents? How were you able to sort of tailor your homeschooling approach to meet their individual needs?
Sure. So it's kind of, like living in a big family, there's a lot of compromise. So that just has to be assumed from the start. Everyone isn't going to have an absolutely 100% unique day with resources and activities. There has to be some compromise. So each of my children has something that they're very passionate about. One's a STEM kid, one's really into music, one is into art, one is into cats. We haven't figured out what that translates into yet, but they each have something that kind of gets them out of bed in the morning, gets them through the parts of school that they don't especially love, so they can get on to those passion projects. And so finding those kind of early around sixth, seventh, eighth grade and kind of going with them as long as they're interested in it until they're not, and exploring everything that comes with it might be as simple as checking out books from the library, or it might be, here's a 2-week summer camp that they're hosting at the university. Let's go to that. Or it could be, taking a virtual course with a teacher who's had a lot of experience. But we also try to do activities together. We do speech and debate. All of my children have to do 1 year of speech and or debate. And there's so many different categories of public speaking in that each of them usually finds something that they're really passionate about. So that's something where we can all drive as a family, carpool, we're all going at the same time. We're not going in different directions, but then each child kind of finds either something that interests them to talk about, or a competition that they really find fascinating. They kind of find their thing within that. And we've also done that with sports and different things too, so that we're together, but we're also supporting each child's unique interests and gifts.
I wonder what changed, Linsey, from kind of those early days, as you said, of experimenting with homeschooling and just giving it a try to now as a veteran homeschooler. What changed in your homeschooling approach from those early days to now?
Honestly, and this is going to sound probably anti to what maybe people want to hear, it took me kind of being, number one, over the age of 35, being more confident in just who I was as a person. So then I could be more confident as a parent. And it actually just was me not listening to everything else. I had a lot of parent friends that were using this curriculum or doing this activity, or they really felt like, this is what homeschoolers should be doing. And I just felt like I needed to listen to my husband, to God, to kind of what I was hearing inside, and just say, you know what? We have a path that's very unique for us. Our children have a very unique path. It might be skipping out on this big conference everyone's going to, or not doing this camp that everyone's going to, but instead taking the kids to North Dakota and looking at buffalo and digging rocks out of the ground. It's being very in tune to just understanding your child is very unique. And so therefore the way you teach them will be unique. And that might be taking a year to just take a breath and do what your family needs. And we had that opportunity, I think, during COVID, which was kind of a mixed blessing. We got off that rat race of doing all the activities and doing all the co-ops and doing all the things. And we just had some time to be kind of still and listen to our kids and really ask them, okay, what drives you? And that gave us some answers we were kind of surprised to hear, but it helped us refocus to be a little bit more, okay, this has always been about family. So how do we bring family back into it and be a little less busy and a little more intentional?
I love that. So just becoming more self-assured, not only as a parent, but as a homeschooling parent too,
Yeah.
and feeling more confident in the methods that you're using. So let's start talking about the book, Homeschool Hacks. You had the idea for a book about homeschooling roughly a decade ago, and had at the time tried to find an agent, see if there was a market for it. There wasn't so much interest at the time, but then you kind of revisited this manuscript during COVID, and the book sold very quickly to Simon and Schuster, and of course came out in 2021. What was that like for you? Not only kind of your early stage of trying to get this book published, but then finding such a popular audience for it in 2021.
Yeah, it was funny because it's all just kind of about keeping connections throughout the years. Someone that I had written on a blog 15 years ago, we weren't getting paid hardly anything. Beginning writers, she had gone on to publish several books, and I had watched this book that I had just kind of go into a drawer because people didn't think homeschooling was really a thing. There certainly wasn't enough people interested at the time probably to buy a book on it. And it was hard to explain the concept to, publishers who were maybe not very likely to have kids that they homeschooled themselves. And then when the pandemic came and everyone started to adopt the term homeschooler, even though I think we all can agree some of the things going on at the time were just school at home, which is completely different than homeschooling, I think, in a lot of ways. People realized, oh, there's a whole segment of people who have been doing this, and we may be doing it for some time. and we maybe come back to it even after the pandemic. And so there kind of was this eye-opening, maybe we should look at this. And so my friend who had an agent said, we need to have this person take a look. And it was a very whirlwind process. So I don't know how long it usually takes to write a book, but it was 90 days from the time we signed to the time I turned in the manuscript. What was great about it, though, is it wasn't anything I hadn't thought about in my head or in the shower over and over again for 10 years. If I had a book, what would I say? And so it was very much an interviewing a lot of parents who I had already identified as experts in their respective homeschool styles, and just kind of updating with some of the new things that we've been blessed to have, the CLT, some of these virtual tools, just different resources parents have now that we couldn't even have imagined having 10 to 12 years ago.
Well, again, it's such a wonderful resource. Highly recommend, especially for families who are considering homeschooling and don't know how to begin. And in fact, that's really how the book starts, which is, what do you do at the very beginning on this journey? I wonder if you can share kind of your top tips for families when they're just taking the leap into homeschooling.
Yeah, so how to begin is almost how not to begin. And I know that people get very excited and they hop online and they announce that they're going to try homeschooling, and then they get 1,000 people saying, buy this curriculum, buy this book, try this, try this, try this. The problem with that is that homeschool resources can be very expensive, especially if you're excited and you want to buy everything a publisher has to offer. But you don't usually yet even know your child. So just like when you're taking a child out, they call it deschooling, or there's different versions of the word where you're kind of helping your child adjust to being home. Even if you're starting at 5 years of age and you've always had them at home with you, there's this kind of period of getting to know them and getting to know not particularly their learning style, but what types of activities would keep them interested, where they're at. Children all don't learn to read at the same age. So handing them a math book that's very text heavy doesn't make a lot of sense for a child if you want them to do more independent child-led learning. So it is really a lot of assessment. Almost every publisher has some tools on their website that we've been able to just ask for or download and figure out where they're at. But also just finding out what might get a child interested in learning. Like I said, my child loves cats. Everything is about cats. We invested in a lot of resources that had cats in them or cats on them, and we used cat stickers, and we just kind of fed into that obsession he's in right now. And we allow him to draw little cat pictures at the bottom of every single one of his math worksheets. So it's not as much where to start as where not to start. And I would definitely not go out and spend a whole lot of money on curriculum. But starting maybe with one subject that you think your child is going to be very apt to succeed in because you want to lead with success. For one child, it was math. For another, it was art. Art is a subject. For another, it was geology. At 5 years old, they loved rocks. So we started getting very basic beginner geology books and just started building a topical library to help that child feel successful in the steps they were taking and learning.
I love that, of watching your child, seeing what they're interested in, and then gathering resources and tools and supplies that kind of foster that interest. And then that can be a launching pad for learning and to explore other curriculum areas. So one of the things I love about your book, Lindsey, is you share all kinds of different curriculum approaches, educational philosophies, to let parents know that there are so many options for them, that they could choose more of a classical homeschooling approach. They could choose Charlotte Mason or Montessori. They could choose unschooling or self-directed education. And eclectic approaches too, where they don't commit to one specific educational philosophy or approach. They can kind of pick and choose from all kinds of different models and methods. But how does a parent decide what speaks to them in terms of curriculum and educational philosophy? How do they even start that process?
Well, the great thing is you're not locked in for life. It's not a mortgage. So you can pick something, decide very quickly, we don't like this. And with very little disruption to the child, kind of course adjust. When you're starting out, depending on what resources you have available, there may be just some things that are out of reach. Ideally, I would choose a classical approach with live online teachers that are experts in their fields and are passionate about their subject areas, and the kids can learn and I can work. That's very expensive, so that hasn't been an option for all my children at all times. It may be that you have very limited resources and you need to borrow everything from the library, and so you're going to be using more of a Charlotte Mason living books approach or unit studies approach, or you're downloading everything for free from a site like Easy Peasy. I think that we can have ideals of what we want, but we have to be very realistic about the time, the money, and the patience that we have. And that's where I kind of encourage parents not to go overboard with buying everything at once and planning everything at once, because you could easily find we can't afford to keep doing this, or it's taking more of my day than I have as a working mother. So really, I think being honest and asking parents who are using those resources, how much time are you spending? How much money are you spending? Most of them are very transparent about what the cost is in getting into any particular, I guess, pattern or style, and pare it down if you have to. We do eclectic because all of my children are a little bit different in their interests, but also some years as a freelancer aren't as great as others. And so we have to adjust as life adjusts. And, I guess that's the beauty and then also the curse of homeschooling.
So one of the things homeschoolers get asked a lot is what about socialization? And I've been a homeschooling mom for 16 years. You have a 25-year-old. So this is something we've heard over and over. And I think, often, or at least I'll speak for me, I sort of scoff at that question, like, oh, please, of course, homeschoolers are well connected and very social in their communities and active in their neighborhoods and in various activities. But I think that there's something deeper to that, especially for a family that might be considering homeschooling for the first time. And that is, how do you get connected, not only with other homeschoolers, but with sort of some of these social activities in the community? And I think it's maybe, worth having a more honest discussion about that, because I do think as homeschooling families, we have to be a bit more intentional about some of that, those social experiences. And what would you say?
Absolutely, you can't wait. It's not a reactive thing, it's a proactive thing. I felt like we missed some years. My daughter was very social. She sought out opportunities. If she had a phone, she was finding out where the nearest, homeschool meetup was. She was driving, she was going. My boys, they were a little more introverted and they were totally okay just hanging out by themselves. And that was fine until one leaves for college and then the other one gets left behind. So we don't learn and grow if we're not around other people. So there is a benefit beyond just having fun or being friendly or learning how to do life. We are better when we're around others. So we had to really think hard about, one, what activities could we do that were within driving distance? And we're an hour and 15 from our, closest homeschool metro group. And then what are we going to do that gives the biggest benefit for all the students? And it was difficult. We tried some things that didn't work. We joined some groups that didn't feel like we couldn't continually do it week after week without feeling like it was fake or it really didn't meet our goals particularly. Or maybe my children were going in, they were having a great time, but they weren't building any what I would call lasting friendships. And so it's kind of like trying to find a job or a church, or even as a grown-up, a friend group. If you move to a new town, it takes work. It won't just come to you. And so if you're a parent who's not very comfortable with that, it could translate to your children not being able to get those opportunities they need. So definitely look at Facebook as maybe a starting point, but then realize there's a whole group of parents who aren't on there or are so busy doing life, they're not posting. And rural parents are really going to have to put in some miles and do the driving. And, maybe that's just a 1 time a week co-op or 1 time a week athletic group, but it's something you're going to have to intentionally do, like you said, and make it almost like a class in itself, socialization, because it won't just happen.
Yeah, and I do think it is becoming increasingly easier for homeschooling families now to find that community and to kind of choose among different homeschooling communities so that they really can find the one that's the best fit for them and their children. especially with the rise of these micro schools and homeschool collaboratives and homeschool learning centers that, of course, were always around. They've been around since the kind of dawn of the modern homeschooling movement, and were gaining traction in the first couple of decades of the new millennium, but have just soared over the past 3 years. And many of them I spotlight in this podcast, of people who are running micro schools, but they could be running them as homeschool programs where students are registered as homeschoolers legally, but they could attend up to 5 days a week as a full-time schooling alternative, or they could choose part-time hybrid options. So there's just more and more of that. And of course, you're in rural Nebraska, so it can be more difficult there. Although we're finding rural micro schools are also popping up more and more as well. But I wonder your thoughts on that evolution to more of these homeschool options, micro schooling and hybrid homeschooling. What have you seen over the years?
Well, what I've seen has been really, really great, because I know starting so many years ago, I would show up to something and I might have been the only working mom. I had to explain why I can't be there 5 days a week. And maybe my husband would be in my place and he'd be the only dad at the thing. Now we're really seeing, number one, more dads taking the reins for the homeschooling, more non-traditional families, grandparents, cousins, people kind of coming in and team working what needs to be done for the children, which I think is great. But we're also seeing micro schools and co-ops and things that are super flexible. So maybe they're only offering Monday science, and everybody comes and they do the science, and then they've got their homework, and that's their socialization. But it's also, now I don't have to teach science. It could be athletic co-ops that go on throughout the week. So kids that are very into sports, we're seeing some of that. They're doing club sports. They want to compete competitively, but they also need to get that schoolwork done. So the focus is the sports, but then there's time to do all the academics throughout the week too. And that might be a drop-in thing for the parents. You're going to pay a little more for that, but it's an option. I'm just seeing so many variations from 1 hour to 60 hours a week of opportunities, and they're being led by people. And I think this is the most important part. They're being led by people who are very passionate about what they're doing. So if it's an athletic coach that opened a club, or if it's a retired science teacher that opened a co-op, or it's a, like one of your entrepreneurs who are just very excited about all around education that are offering like a micro school, they're doing it with the sense of they feel they almost have to, right? They have this gift or they have this passion and they couldn't not do it. And I think those are the absolute best people to have your children around and have your child be taught by.
Yeah, and I think that prospective homeschooling parents now will find that they have more options than they ever imagined, that particularly in more urban and suburban areas, the difficulty will be, wading through all of those choices and all of the different micro schools and collaboratives and communities to find the right ones for your children, and to iterate as you need to as your children get older. But it also gets to what you talk about in chapter 8 of your book, which is the childcare problem, especially for more and more working parents that both have to work, or even single parents who have to work and choose homeschooling, of how to juggle kind of childcare with homeschooling and all of these responsibilities that working parents have. Tell us a little bit about your hacks for that.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan, obviously, of shift work if you can. I worked with all international clients for 2 years to be able to keep Eastern European hours so that I could deal with children at a different time than my husband was dealing with children. My husband worked overnight shifts in caregiving so that we could work that out. If you're a white collar 9 to 5 and your spouse is as well, that's obviously not going to work. Or if you're a single parent, that's going to be a little bit different. But I think as we've entered this space of remote work, even as people come back to work, the ball is a little bit more in the employee's field to say, Tuesdays I need to leave early, or Wednesdays I need to leave early. The other thing is, I think we don't expect enough of our children to be able to rise to the challenge of being in charge of their own schoolwork and their own school day and their own chores. And so it's not a very long time before your child should be able to sit and work quietly, either next to you or in another room, or, get up, do their stuff, and get on the computer and start doing their schoolwork. And so a lot of the parents that have concerns is that their 12-year-old or even 9-year-old, if they're moving along developmentally in a way that's expected, they should be able to sit and do a good chunk of their work for 3 hours in the morning, and the rest of the day be a help to the family and to the household, so that, it's not child care for you, it's the child doing their thing and you doing your thing and connecting throughout the day as needed. And as far as very small children, I am in no way ignorant of the fact that they need care and they need love, and it's very hard to be doing a business call with a crying baby. And so it may just be that homeschooling has to wait for a little while for you, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing or you're not doing what you need, but there is a season for all things. And if you can't make the childcare situation work, whether trading or having families help, it doesn't mean homeschooling won't happen. It just might not be right now.
Yeah, and I think you're right that remote work has really been a game changer, that as parents have more freedom and flexibility in their work schedules, they're not tied to an office building 5 days a week from 9 to 5. They want to grant that same freedom and flexibility to their children and their education. And particularly with the advent of so many online learning tools, it's easier to kind of have your children with you, either at the office or at home, doing their work side by side with you as you do yours, particularly for older children. I think you make such a good point that when we have infants and toddlers, life is hard no matter what. And I think that's a great bit of advice to say, maybe now isn't the season. Maybe you do have to wait a little bit. But certainly as they get older, more self-sufficient, this can be a wonderful way of living and learning alongside each other. And I do think that that's actually why we've seen the growth of homeschooling over the past few years, because of the COVID disruption, is that families found ways of being able to kind of combine that living and learning experience successfully. So, I don't know about you, but the second most common question I get after what about socialization regarding homeschooling is what about college? And this is also something you talk about in Homeschool Hacks. Tell us about your tips there.
I think that the thing about colleges is you're just reverse engineering. And so we get a lot of parents, they like to plan out things. They like to fill out their little books. They like to say, okay, here's what we're going to do next week or next year. And that's great, but we're starting with an end in mind if we do think our child may be going to college. And this works for trade school or, any volunteerism or anything that you think they might do at the end of their high school career. But you really have to look and say, what are all the possibilities, whether that's colleges they want to attend or programs they want to get into, what needs to happen before they get there? And then where are we at now? And you're really just chunking it up into steps. And it seems like such a simple concept, but we have so many parents who hit junior year, senior year of high school. And I've been there where it's, oh no, we have to now smash all this stuff in at the end so that we can truly be college ready. Had we kind of stepped back and maybe cut out some things that were fun, but didn't necessarily achieve that end, we maybe could have managed our time better. So we have not run into any colleges that have pushed back at all on the homeschooling. Most have been open arms. We've seen special scholarships for our children who are homeschooled. We are seeing just so much eagerness from professors and faculty to get to know our homeschooled children. I think in part because they're seeing great results with those students. And so the homeschool students will be a sought after population of students. If they haven't already in a certain institution, I think we're going to see more of that. And so really it's, can you rise to the expectation now that's being put out there about homeschoolers, and what classes do we need to be taking or teaching or having others teach so that we are lined up to where we need to be for that final. And every school is very transparent about the years of subjects they need, how much foreign language, what tests you need to take, what needs to be on the transcript. It's out there and it's on their website. And just, I think, collecting those now and setting those as goals to achieve before the child graduates is about the best thing you can do. And then don't underestimate gap years. I think in the past, gap years have been looked poorly on, but I think COVID kind of put those in a new light. And so if your child has graduated high school, and they're not sure really what they want to do, or maybe they need a little more time to ripen with some life skills, that 1 year working or volunteering or job shadowing isn't seen as the bad thing it used to be. And some universities are even looking at it as, great, now we know the student is fully invested and knows what they want to do versus kind of floundering around and figuring it out. And that helps the college look better too.
So, Lindsay, as we begin to wrap up, we saw a burst of homeschooling, certainly in the first year of the COVID response with school shutdowns, a doubling of the homeschooling population at that time to, almost 4 million, potentially even more, depending on the data sets that one's looking at. Some of that has retreated, although homeschooling levels remain well above pre-pandemic levels in most geographic areas. What is your sense for the future of homeschooling over the coming years?
Well, I think the word homeschooling is going to have a different meaning or maybe no meaning, and that could be a good thing. We're seeing regulation that's really opening up the possibility for students to take some classes at their public school in conjunction with classes at home. We're seeing the ESAs and the 529s kind of opening up how money can be spent and used. I think there's going to be more of a blurring of true homeschooling and true public or private schooling that can give that kind of undecided or maybe unsupported group of parents more options to kind of play within this space that had been very closed to them before. I'm eager to see how students who've kind of fallen in that gap will now have new opportunities, and how maybe the word homeschooling won't be the word that we use. I call it education curation, right? I'm pulling different things together for my children to use. Very little of it is at home. Some people, they talk more about the flexibility of schooling and less about the homeschooling. I just think we're going to see more of a blur. And I'm actually happy to not have those hard lines between homeschoolers and non-homeschoolers, because I don't know that they're necessarily helpful. And I think it really limits what we're actually doing in education, which is just far bigger than what that term could ever convey.
Education curation. I love that term. And you're right. It's so much more representative of the authentic homeschooling experience. I think what most people find when they choose homeschooling than that kind of hackneyed term of homeschooling. So, Lindsay, what's your final bit of advice for a prospective homeschool family thinking about becoming an established legal homeschooler? What would you say to them?
Well, definitely, Homeschool Legal Defense organization has the most comprehensive set of videos on YouTube for like how to get started in 3 minutes in your state. So if you're even thinking about it, that would be the first place to go to even find out if it's something you can legally do. And then I would find somebody you really admire and you see yourself in doing homeschooling. It could be someone local, it could be someone online. And if you kind of share their values and share their vision for education, reach out to them. I think that you don't have to pick people that are necessarily in your geographic area or necessarily, have been foisted on you as the people you need to listen to. I think because this is very values based and everyone has different values, you do need to seek that community that thinks the way you do as far as what you hope to get out of your child's education. It may be very different than what that local group is hoping for their children. And, you don't want to put yourself immediately in a position to feel alienated or alone. Look for those other moms and dads who are kind of living the lifestyle you already have, and start there first.
Oh, such an important insight that you can shop around for different homeschooling communities, find the ones that are the most aligned with you and your values and what you want for your children. I think that's really good piece of advice. So, Lindsay, the book is Homeschool Hacks: How to Give Your Kid a Great Education Without Losing Your Job or Your Mind. It's available on all major book retailers. I'll have the Amazon link in the show notes, but how can my listeners and viewers connect with you?
I am still on Twitter, even though I've been very quiet, at my last name, Knerl. And linseyknerl.com is my website that professionally, but you can reach out to me anytime there. And I still get emails from people who often just need the next step. And I'm happy to connect people with someone that shares your values and that is also passionate about education.
Linsey Knerl, thank you again for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you.